Thank you. Thank you, George, for this introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, Antitza, Christian. The past 2 years have been maybe the most turbulent and specifically the most unpredictable in the history of Europe's energy system. Responding to this huge energy crisis has demanded much of our focus, much of our time, and much of our efforts. And also a lot has happened. But there is one particular moment that I think we all remember. 2 years ago, on the 23rd of February 2022, Ukraine disconnected from the Russian electricity grid. And only a couple of hours later, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And many believed that Ukraine's pursuit of energy independence would be of short duration. However, 2 weeks later, it achieved complete synchronization with the continental European grid. And the result was a success. It ensured the stability of Ukraine's electricity system. It kept the lights on, even during the darkest winter hours. And now, Ukraine is interconnected with over 100 million Europeans in 24 countries, most of which are in the EU. And we are very grateful to the European TSOs for this incredible achievement. Their success story underlines the importance of the cross-border energy infrastructure and also the theme of the debate today. Grids are at the core of the energy system. Power generators, transmission and distribution lines, they all work together to deliver energy to millions of consumers across Europe. But not only. The synchronization with Ukraine also shows that cross-border energy infrastructure is a matter of geopolitical importance, of energy independence. Cross-border energy infrastructure fosters competitive energy markets. It enables the free flow of electricity across borders, and it increases market competition. Cross-border energy infrastructure improves the stability and reliability of electricity supply, and it allows for the seamless exchange of electricity, reducing the risk of blackouts and power outages. And most importantly, interconnected grids facilitate the sharing of energy resources across borders. Regions with surplus renewable sources like wind or solar can export their access to areas with higher demand. By allowing electricity to move across borders in a matter of minutes, interconnection creates a more flexible system that can balance geographic variations in wind and solar generation. The clean energy transition was once born out of climate necessity, but today it has become an economic and a security imperative. A better connected Europe is therefore crucial for our continent. However, our ambitions for renewable energy currently outpace our infrastructure plans, and they do not adequately align with requirements of our energy systems. We need these trans-European infrastructures fast, and they need to be cost-efficient, secure, sustainable, and flexible. And they need to be developed in a coordinated and participatory manner with broad support on the ground. And this is precisely why the Belgian presidency has chosen to dedicate one of its energy themes to grids and energy infrastructure, the core theme of our presidency. The aim is to highlight the importance of improved coordination of energy infrastructure in the context of European regions and to suggest guidelines to the next Commission through presidency conclusions. I've read the policy paper, which we will be discussing in the afternoon, Unity and Power, Empowering Unity. And I've read this with keen interest. And George, I won't spoil your presentation, but I agree with your analysis. Greater independence requires more interdependence. It is clear that the conclusions and recommendations from Bruegel carry significant importance, because also specifically they talk about this regional approach. Having an interconnected grid and to have more interdependence, it requires a regional perspective. It cannot be managed by point-to-point, by bilateral relations only. There needs to be a regional approach. And we are lucky. in Europe. We have regional initiatives. We have the North Sea countries, for example, coming together in an initiative, but North Sea Energy Cooperation, called NSEC, we like abbreviations a lot in the energy sector. But we have also in the southeastern part of Europe, CESEC, also an initiative, a regional initiative to promote more cross-border interconnections. And so your paper comes right in time. And I want to thank you already for the ideas, the debates, and the holistic approach that Bruegel think tank has brought to the political stage since its inception. In my capacity of President of the Energy Council, I will make sure that this opinion gets the time and space it deserves during our deliberations in Council. It will make a particularly valuable contribution to the debate within the Council. Ladies and gentlemen, it was the dream of a Europe without war that created the European Community for Coal and Steel. It was energy as an enabler of peace and prosperity. And once more today, we find ourselves facing the grim reality of war in Europe. However, it's crucial to recognize that amid these challenging times, renewable energy and an interconnected Europe offer us rays of hope and the dream of a brighter future. Energy, yet again, as an enabler of peace and prosperity. Thank you.
Many thanks, Minister, for both a very good speech and especially for the very kind words. So thanks a lot. So please allow me to introduce now the paper to you. I will try to focus on a few areas of that. For the technical details, you can look into the paper, and of course, you can also reach out to us if you have doubts on some of those analyses. Maybe we can put these slides on the screen. Thank you. So the paper is co-authored by a group of 7 authors. And we essentially have national experts from, kind of key experts from at least 4 member states that are strongly also involved into their national policy debate. So we hope that this is not just a Brussels initiative here, but this is also helping in the member states to spread the word and the understanding. And we are currently also doing some traveling to explain what we have in mind here. So let me see whether that works. Yes. So the first question is why do we need to deal with this issue of more market integration, and why right now, and why is it so important that it should be dealt with by the Council? We have already all sorts of kind of micro level initiatives on this area, and the first point is, as the Minister mentioned, security. So in 1990, Europe had about 50% autarky in terms of energy. By 2019, this fell to 37%, and with kind of increasing shares of oil, gas, and coal imports. And we see that this is a problem. And if you follow the decarbonization targets of the EU, we want to get to about 80% by 2050. And that will mean significant investment in domestic production of low-carbon energy. The second point is competitiveness. In the new world of decarbonized fuels, we will have less tradable energy. Coal and oil are extremely easy to bring to Europe, and therefore it made economic sense and still kept us competitive if we imported those. For natural gas, it already became more complex with a few pipelines that had their own issues, and LNG that essentially opens a gap in prices between the US and ourselves. Now, with hydrogen and electricity, that's getting much more complicated because the transport costs are even almost an order of magnitude higher than for the other fuels. So we will have to do more domestically in terms of investment into our own energy production if we want to stay competitive. If you look into the 2040 impact assessment, you will see that investments in low-carbon electricity will be about more than 1% of GDP rising from a current 0.5 percentage point of GDP, only storage and generation. On top of that, there's all sorts of demand-side investments, heat pumps, electric vehicles that have to respond to the grid and that need to be well integrated and well systematized in order to play neatly together. So we are ahead of a huge wave of rolling out a system with high capital cost and very low operations cost. And we need to get it right, otherwise we are not staying competitive and potentially we have to stop this transition. So how do we get competitive electricity prices? They're essentially, that's the question, because electricity is becoming the main tool in the energy price calculations. There are two options. We can lower the cost of the system altogether, and we can try to share the cost differently between actors. The latter approach is very popular among policymakers with a short political lifetime because it allows them to give something to some stakeholders, but it essentially changes the incentives. It reduces investment incentives, it makes the dispatch of the system worse, and it leads to overconsumption of some actors. So we should not play around with marginal pricing games, with giving certain electricity to certain types of consumers, or putting it all in the pockets of the taxpayer to pay for that. We should really try as much as possible to lower the cost of the system, and this is what the paper is about. Now, from now on, I will be much faster on this slide, so don't worry. What we did in the paper is essentially quantify the benefits that we can get from integrating markets significantly more. And we identify a lot of techno-economic benefits as well as managerial benefits. So the first, most straightforward one is we lower the fuel burn, and thereby we lower also the fuel prices, and we get less emissions. So if the wind is blowing in Poland, then the gas-fired power plants in the Netherlands are switched off. We burn less gas. If less gas is in demand, gas prices fall. So it's really a win-win if we can improve the dispatch. And we get quite substantial benefits, especially if the amount of renewables in the system increase. The second one is it reduces the risk for investors. So we get less volatility, both short-term and long-term volatility with larger markets. The third one, which is pretty obvious but hard to get to, is that renewables potential in Europe is very differently spread. So it might make significantly more sense to build a PV installation in the south and some of the wind installations in the north. And maybe if you want so nuclear power plants in regions with low density of population, then to try to just do it on a national optimized way. The big benefit that both a nuclear-heavy and a renewables-heavy system would benefit from is that you need less dispatchable capacity if you plug the systems together. So you can essentially smoothen out that not only in the dispatch but also in the investment needs. So we calculate up to 20% savings in terms of the backup capacities that you would need. Now, people argue that if we do that together, if we have a European market, we are going to lose security of supply because we cannot control anymore what system we have nationally, and if something happens, we have no phone number to call to make sure that our citizens get the electricity. But what actually happened is that the internal or the integrated market during the energy crisis in 2022 served as a backstop for the European consumers. So France became from an exporter to an importer, and nobody had to be really shut off. Same for gas in Germany. Now, these techno-economic benefits you can somehow quantify. Where it gets really complicated is the benefits in institutional terms. We try to explain that a bit in a paper, but the most important point from that is you get better institutions if you do not leave it to national kind of political short-term fights and try to have it really as a more harmonized European market. And the most important thing is you can get lower capital cost. And capital cost is the name of the game, and is potentially the one that is the biggest benefit that you can get from the single market. So what you see here is that with a system based on largely renewables, about 40% of the cost is financing cost of those generation assets. So it's not the capital itself, it's not the OPEX, it's the financing cost. And if you manage to bring down the interest rate by 1 or 2 percentage points, that saves consumers a lot of money. Now, what does this unreadable and complex graph want to tell you? It wants to tell you it's complex. And it does so by saying essentially that market integration is no binary choice. So we can have very different forms of market integration. We already had some very early on in the 1920s with France and Switzerland and Italy exchanging hydro and coal-based electricity. But what we essentially got to by now is this, what is here mainly 2A and 3A, so markets for the short term. But what we don't have is some coordination on the investment side through markets. So for investments, we essentially have purely national systems that are encouraging investment, and that is not being efficient. And now, after I told you kind of what can be done, what should be done, the question is why aren't we getting there? And there's essentially 3 things that are holding it back. One important concern is distributional effects. So if some actors are gaining less than others from market integration, they might be less willing to go there. A second element that is extremely important is trust. So if you kind of underscale your system relying on your neighboring systems, you need a lot of trust into the system to deliver in terms of crisis. And the third one is sovereignty. So giving the member states and their citizens the well-grounded feeling that they still have something to say on how they get their electricity delivered to them. And squaring that is not going to be easy. And the more integration you have, the more you have to compromise on those 3 things. A problem that I would like to highlight is, okay, then let's keep it as it is, but that's in my view not an option, because what we have seen is that our past mode of market integration was based on integrating the dispatch markets. Those dispatch markets in terms of their share of value of the overall electricity systems are declining, and what is increasing is all sorts of national mechanisms for investments, capacity mechanisms, renewable support schemes, you name it. So what we are seeing is essentially that we are creeping back of national coordination or kind of national investment decisions going away from markets. So to conclude, we think, the authors think there is substantial benefits in more integration, really worthwhile, also significant political effort. We should go for reaping them now. It's no time to waste, because we are ahead of a huge investment wave, and we need to get this investment wave in the right order to get the right type of power plants in the right moment at the right place and in the right quantity. And that is a very complex optimization exercise that somebody has to do, either markets or planners, and we need to do that jointly. And so what do the authors suggest? Well, here we are relatively muted in this paper. We want, first of all, say that this is going to be a high-level political decision to be taken, because what is the degree of market integration that we are willing to sacrifice some of our sovereignty for? That is ultimately a political question, and I'm happy to discuss that in the discussion with you. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Georg. So we'll move now to the panel. Let me introduce our panelists. We know already Madam Minister, but we also have here Director General of DG Energy from European Commission, Dieter Juhl Jorgensen. Warm welcome. And Christian Singlersen, Director of Agency for Cooperation of European Regulators, Energy Regulators. So very high-level panel. Welcome to all of you. And Georg, thank you for excellent presentation of our paper. Let me maybe reiterate what Georg said at the last slide, because once you read the paper, I hope everybody have already, you'll see that it's very compelling in presenting the case for more integration, that it's really presenting the case very well. But then it's a bit open-ended, and at the what next, at the questions that were asked by Georg at the last slide. So what really the level, what degree of integration we need or we can get to, how to get there, what measures we need to implement, what decisions we need to take, what governance we need to implement, and then how to address the effects, the distribution effects, other effects that are maybe not that desirable. So maybe at the end of our panel, we will have some answers to these questions. I hope so. Let's see. Now, maybe I'll now come back to the beginning a little bit and start with Mrs. Jorgensen. Could you maybe again recap for us how well Europe did during the energy crisis, and how much of this, dealing well with it was due to integration, or maybe it was in spite of integration, and we don't really, the integration didn't really help. And then, and then later, what next? So, what the next challenges are, and what steps do we need to take further?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much both for the invitation, but also Georg, to you and colleagues for the excellent paper. Like Tine, I really think we can subscribe to most of this analysis and recommendations. It comes at a very, very useful time. So thank you very much for that. So briefly, how well did we do? I think collectively we did quite well. And collectively is a key word here, in the sense that this was really the European institutions and member states and market operators working together throughout the crisis to make things happen. If you look at the parameters under how do we assess, why do I say, yes, we did quite well, then just to go through some of the key parameters that we set up for ourselves, what were the objectives in our crisis management? Now, the first one is obviously to stay secure, avoid blackouts, avoid shortages of molecules in the system, whether it's for electricity or heating or industry, and that we actually delivered. There were no blackouts. It cost us a lot of money. It was challenging. It was a lot of work, as you have said, Tine, but we managed that. So on the security of supply, we managed it. The second parameter, and that was an objective we set for ourselves, is let's make sure that we maintain, respect, and strengthen the internal market and the energy market. And that sounds obvious, certainly here on the basis of our discussions, but if you look back at the early days of the crisis, there were a lot of suggestions that could we just leave aside that electricity market, because really the design is a problem in the circumstances here. So there was a lot of pressure to review. We carried out assessments of what are the different approaches, but we maintained the electricity market intact as a market, and we strengthened the internal market approach overall. We had common approaches rather than a number of national approaches and a division of the market. The third parameter, and again an objective we set for ourselves, was to make sure that our crisis response would not slow down the green transition. And it's a question of having different objectives and trying to make them work together, but it's also logic. So it was not so difficult, because essentially we know that the best response to the crisis, the best way to get cheaper energy, to get cleaner energy, and to get secure energy is actually to accelerate the green transition, more renewables, more energy efficiency investments. So we wanted to make sure that everything we did was in support of that. And what happened during the crisis was actually an acceleration of the energy transition. We saw significantly accelerated deployment of renewable energy, in particular photovoltaic, solar, because that goes faster than anything else, and it's very, very low cost. It's the lowest cost. And so we saw that acceleration also on energy efficiency. I have a long list of parameters. I don't necessarily need to go through all of them, but we said these were really the key parameters. Of course, in addition to that, we wanted to make sure that we focus on what can we control, what can we do. what can we do to stabilize markets? And demand is in our control. And so the first focus really was, can we reduce demand to help get the right balance between, or at least improve the balance between demand and supply? We focused on storage because one of the biggest challenges going into the crisis was that our gas storage was half full, half empty, depending on how you look at it, but really was too low for that time of the year. And so we immediately put in place measures to fill storage. And of course, the parameter of reducing dependence on Russia was a critical one. And just to recall everyone, to recall the numbers, 45% dependence on Russia before Russia invaded Ukraine, and that is significantly lowered. 1 in 20 units of energy now comes from Russia compared to 1 in 5 before the war. We managed to, as part of it, also review the electricity market design, again maintaining the electricity market design fundamentals, but strengthening it where that was needed, also for integration. A number of aspects there really are for the market integration. And then we identified what were the infrastructure investments needed short term for the Repower EU to step out of Russian fossil fuels, and we made significant investments strengthening cross-border infrastructure in parts of Europe where that was absolutely critical. One example is the CESEC countries, Central Europe and Southeast parts of Europe, where the cross-border infrastructure between Bulgaria, Greece, Romania really was critical for their energy security at the time. So on those parameters, in addition, I spoke too long, I think, was clearly a message there from the technical teams. You mentioned the synchronization. And I think what we did show was, as you were also saying, Tina, this independence goes via interdependence. And that was the approach to the crisis management. In terms of what are the next steps and the challenges, so the first I would say is we learned a lot over these last few years. And we need to make sure that we bring that with us, both when it comes to working methods, in terms of common solutions, in terms of integration, interconnections, and infrastructure as mechanisms to meet our longer term objectives as well. So we need to bring that lesson, all those lessons with us. Secondly, I think the biggest challenge we have here now is we need significant investments, and you've said it. We are in this energy transition with high capex requirements. We need to make that happen as quickly as possible in what is a very uncertain global environment and macroeconomic environment in terms of inflation and interest rates and global uncertainties. But we do need to make that happen. Secondly, we need, of course, to make sure that our security of supply and our overall security strategies are up to date. So we need to review our energy security concept to make sure it is aligned with the global realities today, including a new energy system with a different kind of risks. Third, we need more infrastructure, in particular cross-border infrastructure. It's not always obvious to get the financing for that because it's a shared benefit. So the cost sharing that you have also referred to is absolutely critical. We need to make sure we have the system ready for higher shares of renewables, including electricity storage and flexibility. And as I think you're also saying in your paper, the best storage we have, the best flexibility we have is actually the cross-border and the integrated markets, because you can benefit from others. Your map of France showed that very, very clearly, but there are many other examples across Europe. And then my last point in terms of the challenges ahead, and we're seeing that, is we need to make sure we enforce, that we maintain the internal market, that we avoid national measures coming in and pulling the other way. And I can see that risk is there. So I think enforcement is a critical point as well when it comes to the market integration in Europe. So those would be my main points. Thank you.
Just one follow-up question on that one, exactly the maintaining the internal market, because this is really at the core of what we would like to achieve here. So you're not afraid that we are at the risk of going back to the national sort of measures that we have seen some of those in the crisis. How do we counter that?
I think the tension is always there. It's inherent in the way Europe is built. There will always be a bit of back and forth between national and European. I think what we have learned from the crisis, and that goes back to my first point, what we have learned is that by acting together, we solve issues in the most efficient and cost-efficient way. And so I think we need to show the results of that. We are seeing some national suggestions or measures, and I think it will be important to very, very quickly address them and find other solutions. One of my hopes for that is that we can strengthen, obviously, the European cooperation and governance for that, but also the regional cooperation and governance. You have with countries in the North Sea region very, very close cooperation, North Sea Energies Cooperation. I was at a meeting of CESEC countries earlier this year, and there's a significant interest and engagement for integration also in that region, where it is critical both for us in the European Union, but also for Moldova, Ukraine, Western Balkan countries. So it's a good example of the benefits of market integration really on the ground.
Thank you. Fully agree. So, Madam Minister, you presented a very compelling case here for the integration being in the interest of really global or geopolitical security in Europe, which is absolutely crucial, and we definitely saw that happening with the integration of Ukraine into the grid and so forth. Now, I was reading recently the Belgian presidency priorities for this presidency, and one of the sentences there is pursuing a green and just transition and calling for increased investments to deliver a flexible, integrated European energy network. So what exactly you mean by that? What are the concrete steps that the Belgian presidency wants to move forward with?
Thank you. And maybe I want first congratulate the organizers on having a perfectly balanced panel.
Even more than perfect.
More than on the panelists, and on top a female moderator. And the reason I say this is because I was at the presentation of the World Energy Outlook on Monday, and I was the only woman in the panel. And the organizers told me it's very technical, but we are talking grids, also very technical, and apparently it's not an issue. But thank you, Monica, for the question. The question is a good one, also an intriguing one, and it doesn't have a clear-cut answer. And the reason is that, of course, this presidency comes at the end of a mandate. That is a blessing in disguise. So if you ask me what are your concrete steps, I will not come forward with any legislative proposals. There is simply not any time left. But it's a blessing in disguise, because my predecessor, Teresa Ribera, she finished all the legislative files on the table. That gives us the time now to shape the debate on the topic that you mentioned, and specifically on interconnected electricity grids. And what we want to do, and we begin next Monday, we have informal council in April, DG meeting following up on the ministers' meeting, and then a formal council in May again, is to identify what are the hurdles, the barriers to have these interconnected grids. Not only that, because barriers and hurdles you already identified in your paper, and we will soon hear from Christian also. I think we fairly know what these hurdles and barriers are. What we also want to do is to explore avenues of solutions. And that would be the concrete steps then. For example, we all agree one of the hurdles and barriers could be planning. And the solution then would be more and better integrated panel. But we want to dive a little bit deeper into that. What is a better integrated panel? Do we have to do this from a national, a European, or a regional perspective? And that is what we discussed with some of the member states already. Integrated planning, a regional approach. What is the link between a regional and a European approach? I'm very much in favor of a regional approach, because that brings already like-minded countries, or not, maybe like-minded is not the right word, but countries with a specific regional context already together, like North Sea ministers meet, have a cooperation. CESEC was also mentioned by Ditte. Countries come together, and they will face difficulties, and these will then be the same or different, and that can then be tackled at European level. So this is the level of detail that we are aiming at, and what we want to end up is with a roadmap, is maybe too strong a word, but with guidance for the next mandate from the next Commission, because indeed we have no time to lose. We have no time to lose, and capital investments are indeed very huge and massive. And so we will begin to tackle these issues from different perspectives. The financing issue, we will have the regulator with us for that, but also from a security perspective, so we will invite NATO for that, for example. And from all these different angles, come up with how can we achieve on the target. And the reason is, also some frustration from being a minister in Belgium. Belgium is a small country. We don't have huge energy resources. We have a very small coastline, 67 kilometers, yet we are second worldwide with regard to offshore wind in terms of capita. So we are doing a good job. But we are not producing enough to meet our energy demands. We don't have any gas, we don't have any coal, we stopped that already long ago. And uranium, okay, we stole some uranium when we were colonizing Congo, but we don't have any uranium mines in our own territory. So we are, in any case, dependent. But we can tap into the energy potential that the seas, for example, hold. But if we have to tackle this from a purely national or a bilateral context, we will not solve the problem. We will maybe tackle part of the solution for domestic needs. But these projects are not purely domestic or bilateral projects. These are projects which benefit the European continent as a whole. And we need this huge access to affordable and clean energy in order to anchor our industries here. Energy is more and more an industrial policy. And therefore, we need this cross-border infrastructure. And in order to arrive there, we need other frameworks. We need other frameworks. I don't think that all the network codes and all the technical regulations that you provide, Christian, with Acer, are fit for purpose anymore. That they need to take more into focus what is the European benefit in order to, afterwards, have European funding for it. So the PCI that we have at this point in time, maybe we need an upgrade too, to more taking into account what is the European benefit of some projects. It's a huge work, but I think we can tackle it step by step. I'm also absolutely convinced that we have all the expertise around the table in national member states, in ministers coming together in regional or European context, in the European Commission, also in our different institutions like the regulator, like ENSOE, and so on. We have very bright minds. And so our aim is to bring all these bright minds together and to come up with a specific work plan, what could lead to a specific work program for the next Commission.
Thank you so much. And before I let Christian defend himself, I'll just one more follow-up question, because you mentioned industry. And some of the think tanks and some of the academics would tell you that, or would tell us, that maybe instead of moving green electricity towards industry, we should be thinking about moving industry towards green electricity. So really a bit broader, even thinking about reshuffling our sort of industrial and energy order in Europe in terms of using the best resources in the best cost-efficient way. What would you say to that? Because that is a very difficult, of course, proposition.
I find it a difficult proposition, but I think it's also a proposition that doesn't take into account the lessons that we've learned first during the COVID-19 crisis, when we realized that we didn't have any masks available, and second, from the Russian crisis, that we were so dependent on one single source, one single fuel. So we need diversification. And the energy transition needs so much of materials and products. We need steelmaking in Europe too. We can also do it. We can also do it. We need also, I think, even some refineries, maybe also concrete, all the amounts of materials that we need. If the proposition would be that we would ship them from around the world to bring them, I think it's too simple and too easy.
Yeah, no, I meant reshuffling within EU, not outside of the EU.
Within EU.
Yes.
Within EU. That's an interesting question, because I think there is, if you say this, if we use the word reshuffling, it's a very polite and diplomatic way of naming things, because it's not a reshuffling taking place. It's member states that are out-competing each other. That's what's going on. And in order to protect industries and jobs in specific locations, I have sometimes the impression that it depends on how large national budgets are. And that that it depends on what is the subsidy amount. And we should not be naive, because industries see this. And so that means that they also come to see national governments, specifically with this question, to have more money, more direct subsidies. And we forget to ask the question, okay, but what can you do for us? And this needs to be a balanced game. And I guess, Dita, and I apologize beforehand, but it's not you, it's another DG. But I really count also on European Commission and specifically on DG Competition to look into this with a fair view. That competition is not only evaluating a specific subsidy scheme, but also the effects it has, the consequences it has on surrounding member states.
Thank you. This is exactly the point that I wanted to extract here, because it's really, this is about the governance, right? We're talking about the integration needs good governance. So Christian, now over to you. Acer has been working really hard to promote further integration of electricity markets in Europe. What would you say were the big successes so far? What remains to be done? And maybe if you could just detach yourself from all the political realities and tell us, in your ideal world, how would the market should look like to deliver all the benefits that we talked about, if there were no constraints?
Right. No, thanks a lot. I'll try to answer that and maybe also draw a bit on what Tina and Dita said. If the echo is too vast, I can switch to the mic. You let me know. I think in terms of integrated electricity markets, we have seen quite considerable progress in the volumes and therefore also in the value of trade in what we call day-ahead and intraday markets. They have increased in importance and volumes of trade. And the way maybe technically to address that or to portray that is we are quite efficient in utilizing whatever capacity is made available for the market. And that's the segue to the second part, where we are doing less well. How much capacity are we on a continuous basis making available for the market? This is sometimes captured in a rule called the 70% rule. Some say it's an arbitrary figure, but it basically represents the notion we need to have significant trust in a fair share of volume of capacity being made available for the market. There we have done less well, something we focus on quite a bit at Acer with the national regulatory authorities, and we'll probably be coming with an opinion relatively soon, sort of not waving the red card necessarily, but sort of the yellow one, which if you get too yellow in football, I'm a big football fan, it leads to a red, and it's sort of a bit of a heads up. Now, why is that important in addition to, let's say, the benefits which could be reaped? What about the prerequisites for the original infrastructure investment underneath, et cetera? Those are all relevant. But I want to highlight it here because we also touch upon trust. And if there is a political imperative to move towards more integrated electricity markets, it probably needs to be underwritten by trust. And this comes back to what Dita was saying as well in terms of trust in the rules and the enforcement, et cetera. I think that will be a prerequisite, that there is a perception of even Steven, level playing field also internally, as it were. And Tina, you were alluding to this as well, I think. So that's why a so-called technical rule and benefits and all kinds of stuff, it actually boils down a little bit to trust that the system works. Now, ideal world, you can imagine many things. I would touch upon what you were saying, Tina, a bit on the question. And maybe put it very bluntly, do we outcompete each other, or do we aggregate our competitiveness vis-a-vis those competitors we see around the world? None named, none shamed, and all that stuff. Vis-a-vis North America, by laws of geology, we are at a price disadvantage because of certain resources that they have that we do not have in the same way. And I sometimes like to frame it per your question about where do the energy-intensive industry goes. There is this dilemma, does the energy get to the Ruhr, or will the Ruhr get to the energy? Now, if it's the latter, I can just imagine the political economy challenges associated with that, and that's also what you were saying, Tina. So let's get the energy to the Ruhr, and by the way, all other places as well. I think that would be much preferable. And I think one of the links there is that, what you point to here. So how do we then do that? One component, I think, being we need to share costs as we share benefits. We need to have probably an upgraded planning coordination function, absolutely. But we also have to underwrite it with trust. Because otherwise, why would you accept to become a significant structural importer if you're a bit hesitant as to whether the system would function? That would be a difficult proposition, no? So I think that trust, of course, that's a very fluffy concept. What is trust? Where is it? How is it anchored? But finding ways to capture it in, let's say, structural format is probably going to be part of the package, as it were.
Thanks a lot. And if there was one measure that you could name that you had worked on before and then didn't succeed, but you would like it to implement it, what would that be?
That's a long list.
Or three measures, three.
Let's say, 70% we need to make more of a viable proposition, not just because of the economic benefits, but because of the trust in those markets working and sufficient capacity being made available. I think we all recognize the electricity system of the future will need to be a more flexible one in the hour-by-hour time frame, day by day, week by week, even seasonal flexibility. Part of that is interconnections, absolutely. Part of it is also demand response, and there are actually significant barriers in many member states to that, some of them for good reason and legacy reasons, but nonetheless that also needs tackling. And then maybe the final one, if it's the top three, coming back to your infrastructure points and what works well and less well. We have a concept on sharing of costs in infrastructure, which, with the abbreviation fetish we have, is CBCA, so cross-border cost allocation. The bumper sticker lesson from that is, main rule, default rule is, costs lie where they fall, in other words, very territorial. And the most, where we see, let's say, an exception to that default rule is when the EU picks up the tab. So, as I sometimes like to joke, Tina and I, we can agree on the restaurant bill very easily if Dita pays. Yeah, why 70-30 split? That's good, yeah, but Dita will be paid anyway. So I'm joking, of course, but it's much easier to agree on a different distribution if someone, quote unquote, else pays. And then I think that leads to some saying, well, the future is that EU pays for everything. But is that really realistic? Is it really realistic to have EU funding pay for all? Or do we need to maybe work a bit with that? That's more, Dita will know how that goes, etc. But we also need to have cost-sharing models, which I think are also those who have skin in the game need to find a way to share costs and not just relying on a big socialized pot only. I'm not saying it's not part of it, but I don't think it can be the whole thing.
Thank you. So maybe one takeaway would be to think about increasing some of the European funds, but then the trust issue comes into play more and more, that we have to trust that these funds will be well spent, right? So Georg, about the open-endedness of the paper. Now, your particular, wish list for what needs to be done, what governance measures needs to be implemented, what regulations need to be changed in order to move the integration forward, and really what would be your ideal sort of degree of integration?
Yeah, no, the challenge is indeed that I guess we need to offer different menus, and I would maybe highlight three menus that I could think of. One that is sort of improving the current system, which would start with what Dita mentioned, better enforcement, which then also might include creation of a sort of European information platform, European Energy Agency, that makes reference data modeling available to just softly get to better coordination. We have these national energy and climate plans that can be better coordinated across borders. We can somewhat harmonize some of the market instruments, building more transmission lines, better cost sharing. So that for me would be kind of a very smooth evaluation of what we are having. The second stage that as you can hear, I will be more favorable of is that we gradually evolve towards a changed system, to a different system. So it would be a step change. We would need really credible commitments from the member states that their national decisions don't or are taking into account the impact that they are having on neighboring markets. That needs to be really enshrined into high-level commitments of the member states. I'm not a lawyer to see how that can be done, or whether that's more a political thing. At best, I think we should go further and allow some cross-border participation in national markets, and maybe even go for joint markets, including for mechanisms for supply security. And we could, or we would in this case have to kind of backstop such a more radical approach by some sort of joint funding instrument that helps to address the distributional concerns. So if you go there that more is done jointly, the distributional effects will be way stronger, and you need to have some European tool that smoothes out the effects. So like we did in the ETS with the Social Climate Fund and other tools to make sure that somebody gains. Ideally, one can link that, for example, to grid investments, because then you're at least paying for something sensible out of these European funds. And then finally, there is kind of a most radical approach, like daring a new start for the European market. So building a system that kind of, with all we know about how the new electricity market is looking like, kind of builds up a future-proof electricity system for Europe. It would include really deep institutional solutions like joint system operation or a truly European regulator. But at the current stage of discussion, I think it will be hard to get there. But maybe we can go for option 2 and keep option 3 at least a door open.
Yeah, thanks. About this option 2, so the step change, it's already quite ambitious, right? Because when we look at what measures are now being taken up by member states, and when I look at our countries, so Poland and Germany have actually pretty the same sort of challenge in front of them, having to get rid of coal and replace it with something. And now this new power plant strategy presented by the German government, was there, or by your knowledge, was there any attempt at coordinating this with the neighbors? Or, because we talk about these visions for how far we want to get to, but right now there are things happening that do not even, people don't even talk to each other.
I mean, let me turn it around. I mean, we just recently published something on the German power plant strategy, and it shows kind of what institutional straitjackets we are already in, and how difficult it even is for member states to do what they want to do in the current system. So we are a bit between the two worlds. We are in a world where we have a lot of constraints on what member states can do. So therefore, Germany came up with this rather crazy idea to have hydrogen power plants that have to run for a certain amount of hours, even if they would not be necessarily needed, in order to comply with some pre-notification they gave to DG Competition. On the other hand, they find it difficult to finance those plants because the Climate and Transition Fund that was supposed to do that has been killed by the German Constitutional Court, and it shows how expensive those things are. So the way out of that, saying, okay, well, if Poland finds it very difficult to build their offshore grids because nobody is trusting that the regulation will stay stable, Germany finds it difficult to build the backup power plants out of fiscal pockets, then maybe we need some more European tools and more market-based tools to get the financing into the system. Otherwise, we will get nowhere. So I'm slightly kind of pushing back to the notion it's just about hardware. It's just about building more grids. I think we need to go some institutional steps, even so it's very understandable that the appetite for that is limited.
Absolutely.
I can give maybe the neighbor perspective on the question, as Belgium being a good neighbor and a good friend and bilateral friends with Germany. No, they didn't consult with us. But I like to push the question back, do they need to? Is it preferable? Yes, and we do. We have a lot of exchanges on security of supply. But this is also, it comes back to security of supply, how to manage that you have enough capacity and energy output to manage the peak. And Belgium has a capacity generation mechanism in place to do that. Germany, not yet at this point. But when we do our calculations to meet the norm that we have set, we look naturally into what's happening in the neighboring countries. And then we see from our side that indeed there is a deficit on the German side. But it is up to the national responsibility of each member state to have security of supply. So we also take for granted that indeed Germany will manage its issue. So should they consult with neighbors? Yes and no. They need to manage their security of supply issue, then I am happy. And then, of course, we can have bilateral exchanges. And we have a very good relationship with Germany. In fact, we do this. We have our technical teams sit together at multiple points in time to keep each other posted on what we are doing on both sides of the border. We tell them, we do our calculations, we see a deficit. How do you see this? Oh, we have a plan in place. The plan is this. We have the same with France. France had a huge issue with unavailability, an historic high on their nuclear power plants. At that point in time, we had a bilateral exchange at 3 levels: minister, team of the minister, and administration. So we have these exchanges. Doesn't mean that we cannot go further, but I think we also have to come up with frameworks that, and it comes down to what you said, trust. That we have to we can help to implement each other's schemes and help each other more than we are doing right now.
Christian, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I'd like to come in on it. It's at the essence of it all, I think. Ensuring security of supply will remain a national preoccupation for eternity. I think that's how it is and should be. And yet the way that is then done can have, it need not, but it can have effects on neighboring countries. So let's say a hypothetical example, I'm not pronouncing myself on the German government's decision, but a hypothetical example, let's say you were to invest in a lot of flexible thermal generation for various purposes, one of them perhaps being security of supply, other things. And they participate in the market with a lot of off-market remuneration. That can have a knock-on effect in an interconnected market because the flexibility assets that we need in the future will then, maybe in adjacent markets, need significantly more government subsidy to be able to compete. So that has a knock-on effect, which that other neighboring country or countries will then face. Doesn't mean that the first measure is illegitimate per se, it just has knock-on effects. So we need to find a way, whether it's adequate flexibility needs assessment, it's more coordination at the central, just so we find a good, let's say, commonly agreeable approach, because there are these interlinkages in an interdependent market. We need to find a good way to make sure that there is an adequate consideration of possible knock-on effects on neighbors, right? That's the conundrum, how to find that.
Let me just come in briefly here. Yes. So, as you've said, Christian, security of supply, every government will want to make sure that they can give that to their citizens. But I think we've also seen during the crisis that if we accept it as a purely national responsibility, it doesn't work. And that was the importance of our crisis response, was to strengthen cooperation, to strengthen the common framework, solidarity provisions. It was not easy, and I'm sure it was not easy for national governments to go back and explain what does this mean. But it was the only way to manage the crisis, and so I think we need to try to push that logic that it's purely national. We are much better at it if we do more of that together. National decisions have significant impact on neighboring countries, and again, you have mentioned it. If you have a problem with the grid in a large neighboring member state, now that has impact on all of the smaller or larger neighboring member states, and we see that every day in the electricity market. So we need to recognize that and see how do we best approach it. The second point is, as Christian has referred to, trust, and trust is really, really good. Trust probably works better if it's not blind, but if it has a framework around it to help further it. And so I think we do need to look at the governance framework to make sure that we have the best possible governance framework so that trust can blossom and deliver good results. And that's my third point is, we have a good governance regulation. We have the national energy and climate plans. The time is now one where we are reviewing it. We're having public consultation on that to see, can we strengthen that governance framework? How do we use the national energy and climate plans also for the best possible solutions at European level, where that is the right response, or at regional level, as you have said, Tina. So that work is also ongoing for a strengthened governance framework. Thank you.
let's stay with that one, because the governance framework, that's a very interesting one, because as you said, the NCPs are very really national oriented. So what is the change that you have in mind for this process? Because it's, for now it's a good way to start. You have to start somewhere, but it's definitely not adequate enough to really deliver, right? What we mean by more coordination of, cross-border investments, maybe.
And I'll disappoint you. I think it's too early to say, because we're currently preparing it. We've got the consultation ongoing. I think it's important to look at what have we learned from the current governance framework, from the current regulation, what works well, what works less well, what is it that needs to be strengthened. So I think before I come up with a set of solutions, I would like to know what is the problem, and then come up with the solutions to that problem. So that will be next time I come here. Maybe I will be able to say a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that the trust issue and the fact that everybody is responsible for their own security of supply, it's probably that's the biggest sort of problem. We also touched upon it a bit in the paper. You called it sovereignty, right? Issue that everybody of course wants to have, but then you need to give up some sovereignty in terms of in order to have these wider benefits. So what is really, I'm asking Madam Minister, what is the core of the problem here? Why can't we move forward more decisively? Why can't we now have a roadmap that, Georg said, this new maybe joint system operation? Maybe can't we trust each other, yet?
Indeed, I think that's also the answer, and that also we touched already upon our discussion on Germany. I think I'm absolutely convinced that we need more political discussions among energy ministers than technical ones. Technical issues Ditte and Christian will solve. I don't, but it is, as long as you have guidance from ministers what you need to do. And that we have to have more honest conversations between us, and also to addressing more what's the key point of the issue. Let me come back to the German issue. Let's give you an example from the Belgian context. When setting up our capacity remuneration mechanism, we took into account huge in volume and capacity. It was strong reliance on imports. This was not what my TSO advised me. I had pushback from several parts of the sector, but I had strong guidance also from European Commission when we proposed the state aid file that this was absolutely necessary. Also for what you say, knock-on effects. And we came also with these scenarios with interconnection as a key enabler also for security of supply. Then came the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And then and also combined with very low availability of French nuclear power plants and no view on what Germany would do to address their own security of supply. And then came the fallback. Then we revised our scenarios and we took into account far less imports. That's why we extended the lifetime of 2 gigawatt of nuclear power, for example. And to have this balance between, I want to take care because I am political responsibility, and I can assure you, it is a very hard responsibility. I am responsible, accountable for the lights staying on. So you don't go over this lightly. You can have models and scenarios and so on, but at the end, it's me. Not maybe me, but if there is something that goes wrong because of something that was not taking, it's me, I go. So I don't take this lightly. So you have this counterintuitive situation where it's your responsibility, your national responsibility, but at the same time, you can address it and taking into account interconnections. And at this time frame, those visions, they don't collide. Because yes, you are right, and from an energy perspective, we need this integration. But the political time frame is, I take care of my own business, my own shop. And how to get out of this is, I think, honest conversations between ministers. And not only in council, also on our regional And why do I say regions in every intervention? It brings countries together that have a comparable context. North Sea countries, we have the same issues, yet we are also different. And so it creates also some sort of safe haven, a safe space to address issues. And I noticed from the beginning, from the crisis, when we began meeting as ministers, every 2 weeks, that we came up with solutions very fast. And the first one was reconnect Ukraine to the European, something that TSOs were struggling for how many years? Many years. Political guidance, ministers who said we want this. The same with the gas storage, the same with gas cap, the same with fast permitting. Fast permitting was an ask from Germany. We have an issue, we need this. Gas cap was an ask from 15 different member states, and in the end we listened to each other. So I am confident, but we need to bring politics back into the game. And it will not be easy, because all of the world is going to cast their ballots during this year. And we don't know what will be the next Commission and European Parliament and different governments. But it's up to us all together from our different roles and different perspectives to keep moving these issues forward and to try to not do it in a technical context only.
Thank you, absolutely. I think we all agree. Christian, you wanted to
thanks.
follow up?
I have a sense we're screwing up your agenda, Monica, but I'll continue the free flow a bit, which is also good, I think. So what you point to, Tina, there was a European Commission colleague who recently coined something which I wrote down because I thought it was pretty good. Many challenges are global, many policies are European, many political dynamics are national.
Yes.
Boy, is that difficult to calibrate, isn't it? So I have a few points on that. First, thank God we have the European Union, because maybe we have a structure where we could calibrate those diverging pressures slightly better than elsewhere, you know. But a little bit more on point, perhaps. Some of the challenges are competitiveness in a competing world. And for me, those are, well, I think we all share that these are acute, and they are there, and they need to be addressed. And I think that would point to then, from us, from the European side, to leverage the assets that we do have. One of them is that one. We have unprecedented levels of energy market integration, benefits here, resiliency benefits, etc. You bring out the numbers extremely well in the paper, I think. And so the question is, can we, despite those somewhat diverging dynamics, can we, in light of global competition, can we leverage that asset? And I agree with Tina also, it's a fundamentally political discussion. It can be underpinned by analysis and technical stuff, sure. But it's a fundamentally political discussion. And for me, I think it's the key one right now in the area of energy anyway, into the new commission and the new the college and so forth.
On the political dynamics of some other, very important decisions that we might need to be taking in the future, which is we have to square off a little bit the need for greater integration, integrating markets, connecting the big markets, with the need to go granular really on our price signals. How do you square that off? Where do you see, how's it going? I don't want to spell out the words, bidding zone review, but it's many years we're talking about it, not moving forward with this at all, and really how do we proceed? Because for some interconnectors there are some really interesting studies. Adding a new interconnector really will worsen a congestion, not help the congestion, unless we move to more local prices. So where do we go?
Okay, I'm not going to dodge the question, but I will start off in a different place, and I'll get to the bidding zone review. Many things do not need to be harmonized at EU level. Many things don't have a one-size-fits-all. There is room for locational specificity, local specificity, national specificity in many areas. And I'll mention some examples. We have a market monitoring effort, and we see a very significant rise in negative wholesale prices in many parts of Europe, not all, but in many parts of Europe. that tells you something. Rarely it tells you something very specific, but it tells you something. Maybe it tells you that the deployment frameworks in those particular jurisdictions need to have more locational specificity. Maybe the tariffication regime needs to be looked at with a fresh set of eyes because maybe it does not have locational specificity. Maybe local flexibility platforms or markets need to be put in place so as to even that out. Whatever. The answer to that rising issue in many quarters is probably not going to be one size fits all. And yes, there are some EU rules which can set like, let's say, grid connectivity standards, etc., which are good to have for all. But the way that is approached will look different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I think locational nuance or 2.0 fresh perspective is needed in many quarters simply because of the changing nature of the electricity system. It'll be different from country to country. That's my first point. Then I'm not dodging the issue. Indeed, a lot of discussions in energy circles about whether the unified price zone in Germany, whether let's say the cons of that are significantly greater than the pros. And I think it's safe to say that depends on whom you ask. We're agnostic as to how to remedy particular structural problems, but we do think it's our role to point to the problems and the different trade-offs. We think that's our mandate, and we want to pursue that. This is the opinion which we'll come with soon, which is this yellow card, that I was speaking to before. So there is structural congestion, obviously, in Germany, also in other quarters, but because of the size of Germany and whatnot, it has significant knock-on effects on other countries. That can be alleviated by grid investments rapidly. It takes time, and progress is being made, but there is still a structural congestion issue there. It can be handled monetarily, so to speak, via redispatch, where you regulate up and down. The cost rose almost 50% in 2022 vis-a-vis 21, also a high price year, etc., but rising quite a lot. You could look at, of course, the bidding zone configuration. That's delayed currently by the TSOs. It's very advanced, complicated computational work. So we will not pronounce ourselves on what is the right way to address this. That is more of a political discussion that will come to the political level, but we want to point to the different solutions and the challenges we see with the different solutions. And that's the subject matter of this opinion, which we'll bring out. And then the actual bidding zone review and the ensuing decisions to be made at political level, whether member states have a consensus or whether it ultimately gets to the European Commission, that'll be for next year.
Thank you. So maybe, Georg, you maybe also touch upon these distributional issues again. What we want to achieve, how we want to achieve it, but what it means for different, countries, but then also different actors within a country. That's very, very difficult. And how do you square that off? And what is the recommendation here? More EU funds we've already talked about, but anything else?
Yes. So, the distributional effects are quite classic. If you have more trade, essentially those that are sitting in the exporting country, the producers are winning because they can make more money by exporting. The consumers are losing because some of their cheap electricity is dissipating into the market, and for the importing country is the inverse. The question at that stage is a bit, because we are now in a transition phase, are the past exporters also the future exporters? And maybe it's getting a bit more complicated because in different load situations you might be in a different situation. So, but one can kind of purely technically try to assess who are going to be winners and losers. It's getting somewhat more complicated if you add to that transmission investments, because transmission investments or grid investments in general are largely paid by domestic consumers, even so the grid might benefit then countries that just want transit electricity through your country, or that benefit from kind of you pay for the grid that somebody else uses. But we can assess them, and in principle, it should be possible to design mechanisms that address them relatively properly. But we didn't choose to do that. One way, as I alluded to, is to say, okay, we have a higher share of network investment that we anyway want to do, and then if we we might even do that outside of any fiscal framework with just tools that are within the energy sector, so that we are not getting into this discussion that we are having on fiscal transfers. That some of those transfers are happening essentially through mechanisms like paying for infrastructure in other countries because it's to the benefit of your country. I would like to add one additional thought, if I may, on. Because in my view, the discussion kind of again risks to kind of ignore a bit the fact that we really need to coordinate a lot of very small investments now in the system. And I perceive the situation that investments are currently and have been for the past 15 years at least done in a way in which essentially companies went to ministries lobbying for specific technologies, getting then certain instruments that were aligned with kind of broader frameworks from the European Union, and then these instruments had spillovers on the market domestically and foreign. And I cannot fathom that this leads to some sort of efficient outcome. I just cannot I don't see where is kind of the rubber band that makes sure that there is no inefficiency into the elastic band, that makes sure that there's no inefficiency in a system that is built on this kind of mushrooming of national instruments. I mean, if you want to find out what are currently the cash flows that individual plants are getting from different government-decided things, from taxation, network regulation, capacity mechanisms, reserve staff, ancillary service markets, and so on, it's impossible. And how can we be sure that this leads to something efficient? I have not seen the analysis on that.
This is coming back to the political will to do something about it, right? Madam Minister talked about. Maybe we'll move a bit to, I'm looking at the clock. Questions from the audience, if we have any. If not, I have many here in the Slido, so I can gladly pass the mic.
Thanks a lot for presenting the findings of your study and thinking a lot about different challenges. Yeah, I think it does work. I was interested in, let's say we once achieve a very high degree of interconnectedness, then at some point, I guess there might also be a problem of free riding, right? So especially if there's this one big country in Europe that is not part of the north where you have a lot of wind and not of the south where you have a lot of sun, but does like to quit coal and phase out gas at some point, then this country might have an incentive to use the high interconnectedness to use that in a way. Do you think there could be a good way to manage this free riding problem, given that currently there are already issues with state aid enforcement? Thanks.
Can I break the ice?
Yeah.
Whatever the contemplation ice. You know, one of the things which surprises me a little bit as to the stage where we are.
Oops.
Sorry about that. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. All right. So one of the things which surprises me a bit is why we don't see more demandeur, if you will, dynamics from those who look into a cost competitiveness issue in the future will be proximity/access to very attractive renewable resource endowments and make that a compelling case for integration. So you're pointing at the next stage, or the 5 stages later down the road, free riding dynamics, etc. But I think the first stage is the first one. Why are there not more demandeur dynamics? I'd be super concerned if I were looking in 10, 15 years from now and looking at if I had energy-intensive manufacturing ambitions for my country. I need that proximity or access. And if I'm not endowed by God to have that in my own jurisdiction, then I need access to it from elsewhere. So I think that's the thing which surprises me. And then maybe free riding comes much later.
Thank you. We have some questions here.
Hi, Eva Chamitha from Iberdrola. And what I would like to ask is, thank you very much for the discussion, very useful, the document. My question number one is linked to the demand. Because at European level, we see a lot of discussion of transmission, which is absolutely the basis to be able to create this unity market. But what we are feeling as producers of energy, of electricity, is we have a lot of demand, a lot of industry that wants to get into decarbonization. And you know that industry needs a lot of heat, but until 500 degrees, electricity devices are able to provide it. So there is a huge potential in decarbonization industry. What will help as well, all these questions of not being competitive, etc., because we bring it with renewables. The problem is we're not being able to attend the demand because we talk a lot about transmission, but we're not talking about distribution. And distribution was always considered as a national decision. But I have the feeling that today, in order to get to all the global targets of the European Union, etc., distribution grids have to be at a certain point tackled with European criteria. So that would be my first point. And my question is, how do you think that we could incorporate that in a debate of European Union? And then my second question is, you have been talking about, of course, and we all desire an internal electricity market. All the rules that we have in place are evolving to that. But at the same time, what we have is an underlying national decision always through the same element, taxes. So through what is supposed to be very national competence, we are really not making possible the internal electricity market that we need. And I would like to ask if there is any suggestion or possibility, as the document says, that in fact national competences cannot be used, as the Court of Justice has said, to avoid attaining European Union policies. So I think that it would be very interesting to see if there is a possibility to tackle this question, because you were talking about competitiveness in relation to the US. The US is paying right now 10 times less of taxes and levies that we are paying today in Europe in electricity. There we have an enormous point of lack of competitiveness in our industry. So also I would like to know if there is any idea or possibility that we can be seeing in the near future some solution to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Just briefly on those very, very good points. First of all, as you've said, distribution systems are critical for achieving our objectives and for affordable, clean, and secure energy. We have done quite a lot with the distribution system and DSOs, including with the European entity. And as part of our Grids Action Plan, I think the closer integration, the closer working together between TSOs and DSOs is absolutely a necessary part of the investments and planning that will be needed. So I would say that is ongoing with more work ahead for all of us. Again, national competence, but something where there is a strong European component as well. As regards energy taxation, indeed, a very important part in the price setting and in the overall cost for our industry. Competitiveness, economic security, investments are really at the center of the agenda ahead if you look at where the focus is and where the concerns are. And so hopefully that will incentivize further discussions around taxation. As you know, the Commission has a proposal out there on energy taxation directive. There's a unanimity requirement, and that makes it very, very challenging. There's a strong interest and wide support, but we're not quite there yet. Continue the efforts.
Maybe I'll ask one question that I have here in the Slido. And this is something that we've been working on and talking about for ages as well. So EU-level instruments for promoting renewables. There's a question about, can we envisage instruments like CFDs at EU or regional level? And we could, but how do we get there to get more investment? And then this goes to our paper where we show, we need to probably be investing in the places where there is sun and there is wind, not everywhere the same. Anybody?
If I start, and I'm sure others would want to come in as well. The first point, I think, is we have just been through a revision of the electricity market design, a very swift revision with a good outcome. And the electricity market design we now have ahead of us, once it enters into force, actually offers us a lot of the instruments we need. The strengthening of contracts for difference, the application of the use of contract for difference, strengthening of power purchasing agreements, again to help keep prices stable and allow for better predictability when it comes to investments, in particular into renewables, but also instruments to reduce congestion, to do congestion mapping, instruments for flexibility, instruments for demand response. And so I guess my first response is saying we have a lot there that we need to implement and make it happen. It really is about delivering the electricity market we have just designed or redesigned or reshaped. I think what will be interesting then will be to see on that basis what is the interest and what is the scope for more common instruments. Tina has mentioned regional cooperation and the regional interest, and I think probably the more realistic next step is that it is more logic. You have difficult discussions around cost sharing, in particular on large cross-border projects, and that's a logical place to look at what types of instruments can help address it, in addition to the cost-sharing agreement in itself, the guidance that will be coming forward this summer. You're working on cost-sharing as well, but are there other market-based instruments that could be useful in that context as well? But I think it will have to build on what we have just achieved in the revised electricity market design and the full implementation, the full use of the good instruments that are in there.
Maybe to build on that topic, the presidency is indeed thinking about this to see if CFDs at EU or regional level could be an instrument, and specifically to those cross-border infrastructure projects that are not entirely, that cannot be entirely financed from a bilateral point of view. I want to go back to what you also said, and it's true. It's very easy from a national perspective to say Europe should come in. I think Europe should come in, but your point is also more than fair. Europe cannot pay for everything because we decide to do so. So how that we can bring down costs. And what we have learned from our huge negotiation on EMD, and indeed implement first what we have, this is basically a next step, is that indeed we can think about these instruments like CFDs, but also PPAs, and how that both can be combined. That's what we are doing in Belgium. We are setting up a CFD, two-sided CFD for offshore wind capacity that will be tendered as from this year, last quarter. We combine it with PPAs to have this direct access and decoupling from gas prices, direct access to the electricity produced, not only for industries and companies, but also for citizens, for example. But this is offshore wind, territorial waters, meant to serve domestic demand. But we have countries like Denmark, like Ireland, Norway, maybe not inside the European Union, but I mean countries who have more ability to produce electricity and more than they need. And in order to bring it to the countries where it's needed, maybe CFDs at an intermediate level could help also with the financing. A CFD is basically a de-risking tool. And if we imagine more de-risking tools, then maybe we can bring total capex down. So indeed, it's under reflection, but I also tell you, it's not an easy one. So the person who has asked the question can maybe also give some insight on his or her thinking to help the presidency. And Christian is getting nervous.
No. I'm getting very excited. So I have a background a long time ago in the Danish government, and I can reveal, without naming names, there was a discussion between my Danish minister at the time and his German counterpart. And what they were discussing was, a bit philosophically, why don't we have joint support schemes because we have so much exchange of electricity. And of course, the civil servants killed it, very courageous minister, blah, blah, blah. I was part of the civil service, but I didn't. I thought that was a great idea. But never. So from anecdotal to contemporary stuff, let's suppose, hypothetically speaking, you have a developer in country A who goes to their finance ministry for a CFD construct to de-risk. The finance ministry, if they are, familiar with offshore development, they will accept the risk of wind patterns, etc. They're very familiar with that. Let's say it's a hybrid construct which connects to many countries, and part of the offtake risk is actually decided by the congestion management practices of TSOs outside that jurisdiction. I think the finance ministry will say, okay, so I'm underwriting risk for my taxpayers by virtue of the congestion management practices of TSOs in foreign lands, quote unquote. That's not really on. So the natural instrument for that is either to have exactly identical congestion management practices with draconian enforcement, and or to have more joint CFDs. So you share the risk. And that's that hurdle. So if we do things more together, we need to share the risk more together. That's the bumper sticker approach.
So it was a very good question, and we have
a very good
concrete,
question. And Christian spoke hypothetically, but in my office, this is not hypothetically. It's what we try to tackle, and this is also the challenge in front of us to tackle.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock, so unfortunately I don't think we have more time for questions, but I would like to give the panelists one last sentence to wrap up and to conclude, and what the biggest takeaway from today the audience should take with them. Maybe let's start with Madam
Be
Minister.
confident.
Very good. Christian.
I wish the paper is read as incessantly by those who have fiscal and economic policy responsibility as energy ministers.
I would agree with both those points. I think they're absolutely critical. I think the focus for us really is on delivering, making it happen, and it's clear that requires a higher degree of integration in our electricity markets, so we need to make that happen. I think we have the instruments, we have the legislative frameworks. The question is, how do we make best use of them to make that happen? Thank you.
Maybe the statement coming back to the title of the paper. So the Belgium slogan is "L'Union fait la force," and that was a bit the inspiration for the title of the paper. So hopefully the Belgium presidency can move some of that significantly forward, and it can also be taken up by a future commission.
Thank you very much, and maybe from my side as well, I took away that we need political will, we need good governance, we're waiting for the assessment and new proposals, and we need more instruments at the regional or even supra-EU level. So thank you very much to my panel. Round of applause, please. Thank you.